Well, hello, juniors of Tech Boston Academy, how are you? I can't tell you how excited I am that you are about to be engaging in one of the most famous American novels of all time. It's one of the most banned books of all time as well. Maybe we'll have some discussions in either Mr. Driscoll's class or Miss Kay's class about why it was banned, has been banned. But without any further ado, let's all jump right into Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s classic novel, Slaughterhouse-Five, or The Children's Crusade. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, but the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. 1. All this happened, more or less. The war parts, anyway, are pretty much true. One guy I knew really was shot in Dresden for taking a teapot that wasn't his. Another guy I knew really did threaten to have his personal enemies killed by a hired gunman after the war. And so on. I've changed all the names. I really did go back to Dresden with Guggenheim money, God love it, in 1967. It looked a lot like Dayton, Ohio. More open spaces than Dayton has. There must be tons of human bone meal in the ground. I went back there with an old war buddy, Bernard V. O'Hare, and we made friends with the taxi driver who took us to the slaughterhouse where we had been locked up at night as prisoners of war. His name was Gerard Mueller. He told us that he was a prisoner of the Americans for a while. We asked him how it was to live under communism, and he said that it was terrible at first because everybody had to work so hard, and because there wasn't much shelter or food or clothing, but things were much better now. He had a pleasant little apartment, and his daughter was getting an excellent education. His mother was incinerated in the Dresden firestorm, so it goes. He sent O'Hare a postcard at Christmas time, and here is what it said. I wish you and your family also as to your friend Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I hope that we'll meet again in a world of peace and freedom in the taxicab, if the accident will. I like that very much. If the accident will. I would hate to tell you this lousy little book cost me in money and anxiety and time. When I got home from the Second World War 23 years ago, I thought it would be easy for me to write about the destruction of Dresden, since all I would have to do would be to report what I had seen. And I thought, too, that it would be a masterpiece, or at least make me a lot of money, since the subject was so big. But not many words about Dresden came from my mind then, not enough of them to make a book anyway. And not many words come now either. When I have become an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls and his sons full grown, I think of how useless the Dresden part of my memory has been, and yet how tempting Dresden has been to write about, and I am reminded of that famous limerick. There was a young man from Stamboul who soliloquized thus to his tool. You took all my wealth, and you ruined my health, and now you won't pee, you old fool. And I'm reminded, too, of the song that goes, my name is Jan Jansen, I work in Wisconsin, I work in a lumber mill there. The people I meet when I walk down the street, they say, what's your name? And I say, my name is Jan Jansen, I work in Wisconsin, I live in a lumber mill there. And so on to infinity. Over the years, people I've met have often asked me what I'm working on, and I've usually replied that the main thing was a book about Dresden. I said that to Harrison Starr, the movie maker, one time, and he raised his eyebrows and inquired, is it an anti-war book? Yes, I said, I guess. You know what I say to people when I hear they're writing anti-war books? No, what do you say, Harrison Starr? I say, why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead? What he meant, of course, was that there would always be wars, that they were as easy to stop as glaciers. I believe that, too. And even if wars didn't keep coming like great glaciers, there would still be plain old death When I was somewhat younger, working on my famous Dresden book, I asked an old war buddy named Bernard V. O'Hare if I could come to see him. He was a district attorney in Pennsylvania. I was a writer on Cape Cod. We had been privates in the war, infantry scouts. We had never expected to make any money after the war, but we were doing quite well. I had the Bell Telephone Company find him for me. They are wonderful that way. I have this disease late at night sometimes involving alcohol and the telephone. I get drunk, and I drive my wife away with a breath like mustard gas and roses, and then, speaking gravely and elegantly into the telephone, I ask the telephone operators to connect me with his friend or that one, from whom I have not heard in years. I got O'Hare on the line this way. He is short, and I am tall. We were Mutt and Jeff in the war. We were captured together in the war. I told him who I was on the telephone. He had no trouble believing it. He was up. He was reading. Everybody else in his house was asleep. "Listen," I said, "I'm writing this book about Dresden. I'd like some help remembering stuff. I wonder if I could come down and see you, and we could drink and talk and remember." He was unenthusiastic. He said he couldn't remember much. He told me, though, to come ahead. "I think the climax of the book will be the execution of poor old Edgar Derby," I said. "The irony is so great. A whole city gets burned down, and thousands of people are killed, and then this one American foot soldier is arrested in the ruins for taking a teapot, and he's given a regular trial, and then he's shot by a firing squad." Said O'Hare. "Don't you think that's really where the climax should come?" "I don't know anything about it," he said. "That's your trade, not mine." As a trafficker in climaxes and thrills and characterization and wonderful dialogue and suspense and confrontations, I had outlined the Dresden story many times. The best outline I ever made, or anyway the prettiest one, was on the back of a roll of wallpaper. I used my daughter's crayons, a different color for each main character. One end of the wallpaper was the beginning of the story, and the other end was the end. And then there was all the middle part, which was the middle. And the blue line met the red line, and then the yellow line stopped because the character represented by the yellow line was dead, and so on. The destruction of Dresden was represented by a vertical band of orange crosshatching, and all the lines that were still alive passed through it. They came out the other side. The end, where all the lines stopped, was a beet field on the Elbe outside of Halle. The rain was coming down. The war in Europe has been over for a couple of weeks. We were formed in ranks with Russian soldiers guarding us Englishmen, Americans, Dutchmen, Belgians, Frenchmen, Canadians, South Africans, New Zealanders, Australians, thousands of us, about to stop being prisoners of war. And on the other side of the field were thousands of Russians and Poles and Yugoslavians and so on, guarded by American soldiers. An exchange was made there in the rain, 1 for 1. O'Hare and I climbed into the back of an American truck with a lot of others. O'Hare didn't have any souvenirs. Almost everyone else did. I had a ceremonial Luftwaffe saber. Still do. The rabid little American I call Paul Lazaro in this book had about a quart of diamonds and emeralds and rubies and so on. He had taken these from dead people in the cellars of Dresden. So it goes. An idiotic Englishman who had lost all his teeth somewhere had his souvenir in a canvas bag. The bag was resting on my insteps. He would peek into the bag every now and then, and he would roll his eyes and swivel his scrawny neck, trying to catch people looking covetously at his bag. And he would bounce the bag on my insteps. I thought this bouncing was accidental, but I was mistaken. He had to show somebody what was in the bag, and he had decided he could trust me. He caught my eye, winked, opened the bag. There was a plaster model of the Eiffel Tower in there. It was painted gold. It had a clock in it. "There's a smashing thing," he said. And we were flown to a rest camp in France. We were fed chocolate malted milkshakes and other rich foods until we were all covered with baby fat. Then we were sent home, and I married a pretty girl who was covered with baby fat too. And we had babies. And we're all grown up now, and I'm an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls. My name is Jan Janssen. I work in Wisconsin. I work in a lumber mill there. Sometimes I try to call up old girlfriends on the telephone late at night, after my wife has gone to bed. Operator, I wonder if you could give me the number of a Mrs. So-and-so. I think she lives at such and such. I'm sorry, sir. There is no such listing. Thanks, operator. Thanks just the same. And I let the dog out, or I let him in, and we talk some. I let him know I like him, and he lets me know he likes me. He doesn't mind the smell of mustard gas and roses. You're all right, Sandy, I'll say to the dog. You know that, Sandy? You're okay. Sometimes I'll turn on the radio and listen to a talk program from Boston or New York. I can't stand recorded music if I've been drinking a good deal. Sooner or later, I go to bed, and my wife asks me what time it is. She always has to know the time. Sometimes I don't know, and I say, search me.